Okay, it is now my pleasure to introduce Jose Juan Ruiz Gomez, our next featured speaker. Mr. Ruiz is the chief economist and manager of the research department at the Inter-American Development Bank, the IDB. Before joining the bank last year, he was director of strategy and chief economist for Latin America at Banco Santander in Madrid for 12 years. Mr. Ruiz has also held various governmental positions in Spain and was the chairman of the Economic Policy Committee of the European Union from 1991 to 93. Mr. Ruiz's talk is on, quote, rethinking reforms, how Latin America and the Caribbean can escape suppressed world economic growth. Won't you all please join me in welcoming Jose Juan Ruiz Gomez to the podium.
Thank you. Yeah, oh, sorry. Thank you, Susan, for inviting me on behalf of the IDB. We are really delighted to be here and to try to share with you in the next 15 minutes some thoughts about the real situation, of the real economic situation of Latin America and how Latin America can move forward. Let me advance you that my intention today is to share three main ideas. The first idea, which could be contentious, is that potential world growth is slowing down. And this is important because if, as a result of the leverage in the developed economies, as a result of the European crisis, as a result of something unexpected on China, the world economy is not going to grow at the rates it grew from the period 2003, 2008, before the crisis. Something is going to happen in Latin America. This is I am not going to spend a lot of time here in this idea of a reduction in GDP, just give you some numbers. From the year 2003-2007, the world economy was growing at a rate of 4.8%. During the crisis, this growth went down to 2.9% and was a deceleration both in the emerging markets. For instance, China went from nearly 11.7% to something like 9.3%. As in the developed markets, just Europe went from 2.2% to minus 0.2%. This deceleration of growth has been widespread, and what we are expecting from now, from 2013 to the next 5 years, is that this 2.9% is going to be slightly higher, but we are not going to be at the level that we were in the period 2003 to 2007. In fact, what we are expecting is a reduction in this potential GDP growth of the world economy of nearly 0.8 full percentage points. This is my first idea I wanted to share with you. The second idea is what happens in Latin America if the world economy goes down, or slows down. Our model would forecast is if this happens, and we are pretty sure that it's going to be happening, Latin America is going to lose something like 1 full percentage point. That means that Latin America, that from 2003 to 2008 was growing at rates around 4.8%, will grow in the next 5 years to something like 4%. Let me underline two things with this number. Three things, in fact. The first is that Latin America is going to grow faster than the world economy. And this means that Latin America is going to be more important, is going to gain weight in the world economy. And all my colleagues which have preceded me in this podium are right. We are in good times in Latin America. This is an important thing. We are not telling you that we are going to be in crisis. No. What I am telling you is that we are going to lose 1 full percentage points of our potential GDP, or the potential GDP that we show that we were able to deliver in the beginning of the 20s, the first years of the 21st century. This is the first idea, and it's important because This idea that we are going to grow fast, that we are growing, in fact, we are growing at a very decent rates, creates in our government and in our society a sense that we are doing things very well, that we have not to change. And this is an idea that I am going to try to show that is not the right idea to have. The second idea I would like to tell or to share with you is that although we are going to grow less, this is not going to be the same in all the countries of the region. In the region, we are going to have a very wide experience, very wide and different experience. You are seeing, as again, my colleagues from Mexico and Brazil, the ambassador, were right. When we look at the numbers of Brazil and Mexico with our model, what we get, it's that they are going to be more or less growing at the same average that they have been growing in the golden years of these 5 periods of high commodity prices, high international liquidity, low risk aversion in the world economy. They are going to grow to something between 3.5%, 4.5%, which is pretty good. It's good in historical standards. And remember that Mexico plus Brazil makes something like 60% of total GDP of Latin America. This is not bad numbers. But if the two big economies grow at rates which are going to be more or less the same, and we are forecasting that they are going to be a decline of 1 full percentage points in the region, what this means is that some countries in the region are going to be in a very difficult situation. They are going to be showing very big difference in the next 5 years horizon of the performance they have shown in the past. This is the second point I would like. In these countries, especially Caribbean, Mesoamerica, Venezuela and Argentina, they are going to show very big difference of what they has been growing in the past. And let me go to the third idea of this subject. The third idea is that maybe for countries which were growing at 9, 10%, Asian rates of growth, to lose 1 full percentage point of potential GDP growth, it's bad, but it's not dramatic. But for Latin America, with potential growth, it's around 4%. To lose 1 full percentage point, it's really to lose 25% of their potential growth. And this is too much. Some of the things that has been happening in the region and that we have been listening to this morning, such as the middle class, conditional cash transfer, the decline in poverty, political stability, institutional building, credibility, and the management of monetary and fiscal policy can be at risk if we lose these rates of growth that has made all these things happen. There are some kind of circularity in the thought, but this is something that we have to keep in mind. Let me go to the second idea, big idea, I wanted to share with you, and it's very easy. Faced to this decline in the world economy, we don't think that Latin America could face this situation just through counter-cyclical policies. We were very fortunate and we were really very successful dealing with the crisis of 2008 with this use of monetary and fiscal policy that we were able to develop in the region. But when you look what has happened from 2008 to now, what you discover is that most of the countries in the region has used most of the cushion that we have. We don't have fiscal space, we don't have monetary space to continue to implementing this kind of demand-oriented policies just to make face at this decline in GDP. I can go to some of the details, but I think I prefer to go to the third point, which is the future. Just let me tell you something that is very clear. We don't believe that demand policies, these counter-cyclical policies, are the right development strategy. If you want to develop a country, you need to have a development strategy. It's not just to try to implement counter-cyclical policies to defend. You can use counter-cyclical policies to defend yourself of a temporary shock, but if you are faced to have a permanent shock, I think that the region has to move. And this is the third point, or the third big idea I wanted to share with you. What to do? We have been running a very big study on Latin America. What we have come to the fact was that if you compare 26 countries of Latin America, GDP per capita of these 26 countries to the United States, and you see what has happened between 1960 and the year before the crisis, 2007, just 4 countries in Latin America has been able to reduce the GDP per capita gap as against the States. Just 4. And these 4 countries has been Chile, Panama, Dominican Republic, and Peru. And when you go and you see the numbers which has provided, what has been the source of this differential growth, what you see is that just 2 countries, Chile and Panama, has been able to produce an increase in productivity as against the States. All the others, the other 2 which has been able to close the gap, has been because they have been making huge investment or putting a lot of labor in the economy, but the productivity has been growing even at a slower pace than in the States. And all the remaining 24 countries, they have lower investment, lower labor incorporation, and lower productivity growth. Therefore, although the situation is very different across Latin America, what we have, it's a very, very clear problem. And our clear problem is our productivity is not growing at the rates that we need to keep a sustainable and decent medium-term rate of growth. If we compare what has happened in Latin America against Asia, and we put ourselves in 1980, from 1980 to now, Asian productivity has been growing at a rate which today make the index at a level of 160. And the same index, 2,100, in Latin America is now 80. We have created a gap of nearly 80 basis points between Asia and our productivity. Therefore, what we have to do is to increase productivity, to reallocate our resources, and to increase productivity. We don't want, we economists, we are not very sure how to do that. We don't know the exact production function to create increase in productivity. We know that there are things that are important in this endeavor. We know that education is important. We know that equality, increasing equality, increasing the quality of fiscal institution, increasing the quality and the stability of policy rules are important to increase productivity. Rights of properties, all these things we know. But we also know that we cannot come to Latin America again as we came in the 90s and say, we have reached a consensus and this is the kind of reforms you have to do. We learn that such a thing as the consensus of Washington or whatever it is not now, is not possible, is not advisable. What we are telling the countries is that each country has to look inside to see which are the distortion in the reallocation of resources and try to solve them through reforms which can be managed by the institutional development they have and the consensus they are able to create in the society. Having said that, what we have done, it's a very simple exercise. What we have done is the following, and I think here I come with one of the important things that we have discovered. Our exercise has been, what will happen to Latin America if those 2 big economies, Mexico, which are making reforms, Brazil, which are announcing reforms, and which have all these events, Olympics, soccer, will be the change, the reforms in the 2 big economies enough to bring forward Latin America if all the other countries in Latin America do not follow this reform agenda? And what we have discovered is that no, it's not the case. If just Mexico or Brazil make the reforms, the level of integration in Latin America is so low that the spillovers are not enough to bring Latin America to the path of growth that we were asking and to compensate for this external shock of this slowdown in the economy. In fact, what you get is that Mexico and Brazil do better. That's the reason I was mentioning before, that they are going to grow between 3.5%, 4%, but all the other countries of Latin America are not able to follow suit to take advantage of the spillover of these reforms on their rate of growth. Therefore, we try, okay, let's then try to assume that all the other countries make reforms and try to bridge the gap that they have in the misallocation of the resources in the next 10 years and see what happens. And what happened is this happened. These countries try to implement the reforms which are able to reduce the gap in the misallocation of resources in the next 10 years. What we get is that we got an increase in GDP on average for a median country of 1.8 full percentage points, 1.8. And we get, if all the countries do together, we get 0.8 as effects, positive effect, as spillovers of these regional reforms, which means that Latin America, instead of growing at the 4% I was mentioning before, they will be growing at rates around 6.8%, which in fact is higher than the forecast in the IMF for the Asian countries in the next 5 years. Latin America will be able, taking advantage of the reforms and the spillovers of these reforms, to grow at rates of 6%. Maybe you are asking what kind of reforms they have to do. We have reforms in education, we have reforms in sustainability, we have a lot of things to do. But just to put two of the reforms that seems to me that are needed in most of the countries in Latin America, we have concentrated on two. On the one hand, on labor market. But this is not the kind of labor market reform that we were asking in the 90s. Our reform in the labor market, it's now directed to a very key problem, which is pervasive in all the region, which is the high level of informality in the labor market. In the Latin American labor market, 56% of the people who are working in Latin America are in the informal economy, are not paying taxes, are not paying social security contribution. As Peter was saying before, they don't have pension. They are getting now conditional cash transfer, but they are not getting the benefits that are associated to a job in the labor market. And our intention is that this informality has a large effect on the productivity that the region is able to develop. Why? Because informality is concentrated in the small and medium-sized companies, micro companies most of the time, and these companies has a higher turnover of the labor market. They don't invest in their people. They pay low salaries, and above all, they are not able to be integrated in the world economy. They do not export. They do not import. And they have a very limited capacity to access to credit and to absorb technology. This is the real problem. Informality, it's related to productivity. And the reforms to reduce informality, as contrary to what happened in the 90s with all the flexibilization of the labor market, is a win-win reform, because workers are going to have higher real wages, but employers, which are able to have higher degrees of productivity, are going to have higher benefits, and the governments are going to have a broader tax base to finance the social security network or the conditional cash transfer network. This is our first reform, a win-win reform to reduce informality in the labor market. The second reform is infrastructure. We have been creating a large gap in the stock of infrastructure we have in Latin America as against those countries in which we compete. In fact, if you go and see what has happened with infrastructure in the 80s, in the 90s, and now what you see is that the decline of the share of the infrastructure that were made by the public sector in the 80s, we were running something around 2 full percentage points of GDP. We have never recovered this level of effort infrastructure. After the 90s and the first decades of the 20s, what we have had is government making something around 1 full percentage point of investment in infrastructure, and we have not been able to recover the 3% of GDP that a typical Latin American country were doing in the 80s. As a consequence of this slowdown in our infrastructure building, we have developed a huge gap as against our competitors. And our estimate is that we will need to have a 5 percentage points of GDP devoted to infrastructure, both public and private, to be able to close this gap. But now let me ask the following question. What will happen if a typical GDP, typical Latin American country will put 5% more of investment in their budget or in the private sector? Well, what happens is that either it has to finance with domestic saving, or they will have to finance with foreign saving. If you go and see what has happened in Latin America in the last 30 years, and you assume that all is going to be financed by foreign saving, what you will see is that if we were to adopt this strategy, we will be putting all the building blocks to have the next crisis in the country. You can stop. Yeah, that's okay. Why? Because a typical 10 years of 5% current account deficit plus the current account deficit that most of the countries now have will mean that you were asking the world to finance you 7% of GDP. And in the history of the last 40 years, there is not such a thing. There is not a sustainable finance situation in which you can finance current account deficit of 6%, 7% for more than 3-4 years. If we were to invest in infrastructure without being very careful about how we are going to finance and we are going to split the finances of this infrastructure between public saving, the domestic saving, and external saving, we will be running in problems. And therefore, this reform of infrastructure has to be linked to another one. It has to be linked to the reform of how we develop domestic capital markets and we try to increase our saving. Really, the numbers for saving are really very domestic saving in Latin America are very, I would say, are not very good. Just to give you a number, the country in Latin America which has the highest saving rate is equiparable to the lowest saving rate in Asia. And the average saving rate in Latin America is the same, the average is the same as the average saving rate in sub-Saharan Africa. We are talking that in Latin America, savings are running now at something like 50% of GDP. And with 50% of GDP, I think we cannot try to make this huge effort in infrastructure. We need to put something before. We have to try to discuss and to see how we develop markets and how we eliminate restriction to domestic savings, because otherwise I think the process either is going to be too slow to have an impact on productivity, or if it's fast enough, I think we are going to have problems. Let me just conclude with my 3 ideas. We have a slowdown in the potential GDP of the world economy. I am not talking what is going on in next year or the 2014. No, I'm talking that the potential growth, the sustainable medium long-term rate of growth in the world economy seems to us that is slowing slightly to something around 3.8%, no more than that. We believe that if this happens and nothing is done, Latin America is going to pay a high price, 1 full percentage point. Our elasticity to this slowdown is going to be, as usual, 1.2, 1.3, and this is what our model tells. We are not able to compensate this slowdown of the world economy just with counter-cyclical policies. There are countries in which they can have fiscal, monetary policy, and they are going to do something, but this is a temporary policy. It's not a permanent policy, and the only permanent policy is to have a new agenda of reforms, quite different from the reforms of the 90s. This is not a reforms agenda which fits all sides, not at all. Each country has to look at the structure of the country, at the capacity of the institution to build and to create consensus and to digest the reforms. But there are a lot of room in most of the Latin American countries to do reforms which are going to reallocate resources and increase productivity. And if this is done, we believe that top priorities in this agenda will be to deal, first of all, with informality in the labor market, because it's clearly related with the size of companies, enterprises, and low productivity growth. And the other one, it's infrastructure and savings. If this happens and all the countries are put together, we will have this beautiful horizon of being able to grow at rates that maybe in the 90s were not even thought, and that we can compensate by our efforts what the headwinds that maybe we are going to face in the next 5 years, coming from the external sector. Thank you.